Big Bone Lick stems from the history of our area, beginning with the big bones from Ice Age megamammals that were recovered over the last 300 years, and the lick part being from the salt springs and mineral deposits that are within the surrounding area of the park.
By the time we get to the early 1800s with the Lewis and Clark digs that took place here, many of the bones that were on the surface was, of course, already removed, and that's why excavation and scientific procedures were followed.
Big Bone Lick State Historic Site is known as being the birthplace of American vertebrate paleontology, as this area is where the first organized digging of fossils with a backbone was initiated, and that was initiated at the direction of Thomas Jefferson and executed by William Clark and George Rogers Clark.
People for many years assumed that the animals had become stuck. There's been more evidence now that it wasn't so much as the large animals becoming stuck in the marsh as it was the amount of hunting and the killing area along the creek banks themselves that left the remains of so many bones, and we still find the remains of so many tools and flint. Big Bone Valley was described as being about a 10-acre area that was void of trees and vegetation because of the salt spring and the interaction of the animals for thousands of years that came here to lick the salt.
The predominant fossil remains that had been recovered in Big Bone include the American mastodon, the Columbian mammoth, Harlan's ground sloth, Jefferson's ground sloth, the woodland muskox, the ancient bison, the giant stag moose, as well as the complex tooth horse. The Jefferson's ground sloth, as you might think because of the name, is named for Thomas Jefferson. He acquired the first fossil pieces from this type of sloth from a cave in West Virginia.
Some of the specimens that were recovered from here at Big Bone where we identified the mastodon, which literally means breast tooth, mastodonte.
Mastodon teeth have these jagged points. Mammoth are much more sort of flat that way, so you can tell a bit of distinction there. They actually rumored that mastodons were carnivorous for a while, which lends a little bit of extra fun to the idea that he thought they might still be out there and was sending Lewis and Clark out with the idea of maybe there's predatory elephants out there, so watch out for them.
George Rogers Clark in 1781, while he was during the Revolutionary War on the campaign to the Ohio Valley, he sent a large mammoth tooth back to Jefferson. And Jefferson, upon examining that, it's been described as it really piqued his interest.
Extinction is an idea that's sort of coming to the front at that point. Jefferson, you can tell he's trained a bit as a lawyer. He never accepts negative evidence for anything. When he sends Lewis and Clark out, he lists in their orders to attempt to find remains of animals rare and extinct. So he's still got this idea in his head. 1818, he's still writing about, he doesn't really believe that these things are gone, but you can tell he's kind of starting to shift his mind on things.
The Lewis and Clark expedition, Meriwether Lewis was here before, actually on the trek on the way down the Ohio River.
Lewis sends a letter out to Clark. He also says to find the people he wants to hire out there. He lists a specific list of employment qualities, the 9 young men that he talks about that come from the area right around there in Kentucky. That's the core of the Lewis and Clark expedition.
After the large expedition to the west in 1807, William Clark's return,
there was an excavation that took place. There's 2 very nice letters that he sends back, the first of which he's kind of despondent he hasn't found enough, and the second of which he's listing off that he's found a whole ton of things. He says initially that the whole site's been very picked over, but eventually starts to find some of the better things.
At least 5 major shipments of bones that were harvested from here were lost.
The best route they could take was by the sea, by the rivers. So they start out Ohio River, go down the Mississippi. They're collected in New Orleans, sent on a boat, which usually would then stop in Cuba and then go back up to the ports near Washington, D.C., where they'd be picked up and brought to the White House.
Many of the finest specimens have been lost to time.
The ones lost in Cuba were from a second collection that's kind of nebulously defined. He kept a few, he sent a few out. Each of the 3 crates he sent out on different boats, so they wouldn't get, if one was lost, the whole thing wouldn't go away. And he says he also kept a few back. And Jefferson writes asking, will you send the rest of those along? Because I think I can send all the duplicates to France. And then he keeps writing, and there is this 1809 shipment that when it gets to Cuba, the boat is declared unseaworthy, and those 3 crates are lost. The 3 that we have are the ones from 1807.
I think the bones really speak to Jefferson's intense goal to make an American exceptionalism. Jefferson is looking at natural history, at America's resources and America's history as the counterbalance to Europe's long political and cultural history.
So our present collection at Monticello has 11 bones in it, from at least 5 different species. We have an ancient buffalo, American mastodon, woolly mammoth. There is a musk ox and a complex-toothed horse. Jefferson was a collector of just about everything he could find. He was interested in absolutely everything and interested in acquiring all the newest, all the best, all the most interesting things. Jefferson's tombstone lists off what he believed to be the 3 accomplishments he considered his greatest. Author Declaration of Independence, author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and Father University of Virginia. He said specifically that's what he wanted to be remembered by.
Monticello is really an amalgamation of a number of sources. It is the result of Jefferson's intense architectural education and is really Jefferson's ideal. He brings the best of many sources, brings them all together, and intends this to be really a model for other Americans to follow.
It's the best being in the entrance hall right here. You really get this moment, especially when guests first walk in, of saying, you can just look around and see everything that Jefferson is interested in.
The entrance hall was Jefferson's museum. So all of the objects in this room were intended to really work together and to draw connections that would lead people through history to the present day and to the emergence of the new nation. Jefferson is bringing all of these things together to really make a whole educational statement that he intended for visitors to Monticello to absorb. Whereas Europe has thousands of years of buildings and ruins and temples, America has new species, grand species, really important things that help us learn about the natural world.